with a gasp as he sat down again. Surely, he thought, the man cannot have got hold of anything about Edith. Impossible. Impossible. If he had, he would have said more. He would not have confined himself to hinting. That would take a cleverer man. He would have shown his hand. He must have been speaking at random, to frighten me, I suppose. By heavens, what a thing it would be if he got hold of something. Ruin, absolute ruin. I'll settle up this business as soon as I can and leave the country. I can't stand the strain. It's like having a sword over one's head. I've half a mind to leave it in somebody else's hands and go at once. No, for that would look like running away. It must be all rubbish. How could he know anything about it? So shaken was he, however, that though he tried once and yet again, he found it impossible to settle himself down to work till he had taken a couple glasses of sherry from the decanter in the cupboard, and even as he did so, he wondered, if the shadow of the sword disturbed him so much, how he would be affected if ever it were his lot to face the glimmer of its naked blade. No further letter came to Edward Cossey from the castle, but, impatient as he was to do so, another fortnight elapsed before he was able to go up to see Ida and her father. At last, one fine December morning, he was for the first time since his accident allowed to take carriage exercise, and his first drive was to Honham Castle. When the squire, who was sitting in the vestibule writing letters, saw a poor pallid man rolled up in fur, with a white face scarred with shot marks, and black rings round his large dark eyes, being helped from a closed carriage, he did not know who it was, and called to Ida, who was passing along the passage, to tell him. Of course she recognised her admirer instantly, and wished to leave the room, but her father prevented her. "You got into this mess," he said, forgetting how and for whom she got into it, "and now you must get out of it in your own way." When Edward, having been assisted into the room, saw Ida standing there, all the blood in his wasted body seemed to rush for a few seconds into his pallid face. "How do you do, Mr. Cossey?" she said. "I am glad to see you out, and hope that you are better." "I beg your pardon, I cannot hear you," he said, turning round. "I am stone deaf in my right ear." A pang of pity shot through her heart. Edward Cossey, feeble, dejected, and limping from the jaws of death, was a very different being to Edward Cossey in the full blow of his youth and health and strength. Indeed, so much did his condition appeal to her sympathies that, for the first time since her mental attitude towards him had been one of entire indifference, she looked on him without repugnance. Meanwhile her father had shaken him by the hand and led him to an armchair before the fire. Then, after a few questions and answers as to his accident and merciful recovery, there came a pause. At length he broke it. "I have come to see you both," he said with a faint and nervous smile, "about the letters you wrote me. If my condition would have allowed it, I would have come before, but it would not." "Yes," said the Squire attentively, while Ida folded her hands in her lap and sat still with her eyes fixed upon the fire. "It seems," he went on, "that the old proverb has applied to my case as to so many others. Being absent, I have suffered. I understand from these letters that my engagement to you, Ida, is broken off." She made a motion of assent. "And that it is to be broken off on the ground that, having been forced by a combination of circumstances which I cannot enter into, to transfer the mortgages to Mr. Quest, consequently that I broke my bargain with you." "Yes," said Ida. "Very well then, I come to tell you both that I am ready to find the money to meet those mortgages and pay them off." "Ah," said the Squire. "Also that I am ready to do what I offered to do before, and which, as my father is now dead, I am perfectly in a position to do, namely to settle £200,000 absolutely upon Ida, and indeed do anything else that she or you may wish." And he looked at the Squire. "It is no use looking at me for an answer," said he, with some irritation. "I have no voice in the matter." He turned to Ida, who put her hand before her face and shook her head. "Perhaps," said Edward somewhat bitterly, "I should not be far wrong if I said that Colonel Quaritch has more to do with your change of mind than the fact of the transfer of these mortgages." She dropped her hand and looked him full in the face. "You are quite right, Mr. Cossey," she said boldly. "Colonel Quaritch and I are attached to each other, and we hope one day to be married." "Confound that fellow Quaritch," growled the Squire. Edward winced visibly at this outspoken statement. "Ida," he said, "I make one last appeal to you. I am devoted to you with all my heart, so devoted that though it may seem foolish to say so, especially before your father, I really think that I would rather not have recovered from my accident than that I should have recovered for this. I will give you everything that a woman can want, and my money will make your family what it was centuries ago, the greatest in the countryside. I don't pretend to have been a saint. Perhaps you may have heard something against me in that way, or to be anything out of the way. I am only an ordinary everyday man, but I am devoted to you. Think then before you refuse me altogether." "I have thought, Mr. Cossey," answered Ida almost passionately. "I have thought until I am sick of thinking, and I do not think that it is fair that you should press me like this, especially before my father." "Then," he said, rising with difficulty, "I have said all that I have to say, and done all that I can do. I shall still hope that you may change your mind. I shall not yet abandon hope. Goodbye." She touched his hand, and then, the Squire offering him his arm, he went down the steps to his carriage. "I hope, Mr. de la Molle," he said, "that bad as things are for me, if they should take a turn, I shall have your support." "My dear sir," answered the Squire, "I tell you frankly that I wish my daughter would marry you. As I said before, I have nothing against you, and it would, for obvious reasons, be desirable. But Ida is not like ordinary women. When she sets her mind upon a thing, she sets it like a flint. Things may change, however, and that is all I can say. Yes, if I were you, I should remember that this is a changeable world, and that women are the most changeable things in it." When the carriage had gone, he re-entered the vestibule. Ida, who was going away much disturbed in mind, saw him coming, and knew from the expression of his face that there was going to be trouble. With characteristic courage she turned, determined to face it out. Chapter 32